It's kind of mind-boggling when you really stop and think about it. Imagine Uruk, like 40,000 people living together way back then.
It really is. Compare that to a typical village at the time, maybe a few hundred people. It's a huge jump.
Exactly. That leap, that's the massive societal shift we're diving into today.
Yeah, we're taking a really deep look at how the first true cities came about. We'll focus on Uruk in Mesopotamia and Mohenjo-Daro over in the Indus Valley. These places were fundamentally different.
Right. Not just big villages. Our mission here is to unpack how these early cities, well, how they changed everything, society, buildings, even how people saw themselves. Think of it as your shortcut to getting your head around this foundational period.
And understanding this history gives context to, the urban world we all live in now. Its roots go way back.
So where do we even start? How did these places get going?
Well, to really get Uruk and Mohenjo-Daro, we need to rewind a bit. Think like 7,000 to 5,000 BCE. You've got Neolithic farming villages spreading out.
Okay, places like Saddlehuyuk, small farming spots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Saddlehuyuk, Mehrgar in South Asia. Small scale, probably pretty flat social structures, everyone mostly farming.
Got it. But then things started to get more complicated.
They did. Between 5,000 and 4,000 BCE, some settlements get bigger. We call them proto-urban, like Eridu in Mesopotamia during the Ubaid period. It had temples, regional trade.
And in the Indus Valley, similar developments.
Kind of happening concurrently, yeah. Villages grew along the floodplains there, too. But even then, you see slightly different paths. The Indus agriculture depended a lot on those monsoon floods.
Ah, flood retreat farming, right. Different from Mesopotamia's approach.
Yeah, Mesopotamia was developing irrigation more heavily, different environments, different techniques even early on.
Okay, so then we hit the Uruk period, around 4000 BCE. Is that when Uruk itself really takes off?
That's the moment.
Yeah.
Irrigation plus things like the ox-drawn plow mean huge barley surpluses in Sumer. Suddenly they have way more food than they need just to subsist.
And Uruk becomes the center of all that.
It explodes, grows to over 100 hectares, much bigger than anything before it. Meanwhile, over in the Indus, things are also developing, setting the stage for what we call the early Harappan period. So Uruk urbanizes fast, but the Indus region is building towards it too, just maybe on a slightly different timeline.
Okay, so we have these earlier settlements, then this agricultural boom. What were the magic ingredients then? What turned these places into actual cities?
That's the key question, isn't it? And it really comes down to a couple of main things. Agricultural surplus, number one, and trade, number two. They were the engines driving this whole thing in both places, though maybe in slightly different ways.
Let's break down Uruk first. Fertile land, irrigation, plows, loads of barley, I'm guessing?
Tons of it. And that surplus was absolutely crucial. What's really interesting is how they managed it. We see evidence for big centralized storerooms. It looks like grain was collected and then handed back out as rations.
Rations like payment.
Sort of. It allowed people to do things other than farming. This is where specialization of labor really kicks in. Some scholars basically call this the foundation of civilization itself.
Right, so you get potters, builders, priests maybe.
Exactly. But Mesopotamia, it didn't have everything it needed. It lacked stone, good timber, metals. So that surplus grain and things like textiles they made became trade goods.
Ah, so they traded the food for materials.
Precisely. They needed stuff, so they built these huge trade networks, reaching Syria, Anatolia, Iran. We call it the Uruk expansion.
Wow, like early globalization, you said. How do we know this? Finds of Uruk stuff elsewhere.
Yeah, you find Uruk pottery, those distinctive cylinder seals, hundreds, even thousands of kilometers away. And some places, like Habuba Kabira in Syria, look like actual Uruk trading posts, set up just to manage the trade.
That's incredible. There's that quote, isn't there? Something about surplus, labor, cities, government, writing, all driven by trade.
That's the one. It captures how interconnected it all was. Surplus food leads to specialization, which fuels trade, which requires administration, maybe even writing to keep track of it all.
Okay, Uruk, powered by barley, needing resources, creating this vast trade network. What about Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Valley? How did it work there?
Well, the Indus had its own advantages. Those monsoon floods were great for the soil, so they had big surpluses too. Wheat, barley, and famously cotton.
Let's focus on massive irrigation projects then.
Probably some irrigation, but maybe not on the same scale as Mesopotamia. What they did have were these huge structures we call granaries. The Great Granary at Mohenjo-Daro is a famous one. Suggests, centralized storage again.
And that surplus supported their specialists, too.
Absolutely. Artisans, administrators, the whole deal. And they were trading like crazy, too.
Within the Indus region or further afield?
Both. Lots of trade within the Indus Valley itself, but also with Mesopotamia, Central Asia, the Persian Gulf. They were sending out cotton textiles, probably a big one, plus timber, ivory, those beautiful carnelian beads.
And what were they getting back?
Things they didn't have locally. Lapis lazuli, turquoise, gold, silver, copper. And what's fascinating is Mesopotamian texts mention a place called Meluha.
Meluha.
Yeah, scholars are pretty sure Meluha is the Indus Valley. And the goods listed in those texts, they match perfectly with what we find at Indus sites archaeologically.
Wow. Direct textual evidence, almost.
Pretty much. And things like their standardized weights and measures and the Indus script itself probably helped smooth all that trade along.
So, okay, both needed surplus and trade, but the how was shaped by their environment: irrigation versus floods, barley versus wheat and cotton.
Exactly. Different paths, different strategies, but the same fundamental result. Surplus food fueling urban growth and complex economies. And that economic power, that then enables the next big step, building really impressive stuff.
Right, the monumental architecture. These weren't just huts. Let's dig into Uruk first. It sounds like they went big, fast.
Oh, yeah. Late 4th millennium BCE, there's just this explosion of building in Uruk. You've got the Anu district for the sky god Anu. They build the White Temple on top of this platform, like an early ziggurat, but 13 meters high.
Dominating the skyline, I bet.
Totally. A huge statement about the power of the gods and probably the rulers connected to them. It suggests a theocratic system Anu as the ultimate boss, religious and political power wrapped up together.
So, religion and power hand in hand from the start.
Seems like it. Then there's the Iena district for the goddess Inanna. The scale there is even bigger. Temple D, for instance, was enormous, 4,600 square meters. That's like 16 times bigger than the largest temple from the period before.
16 times? How did they even manage that?
Well, it shows they could command huge amounts of labor and resources.
Yeah.
That points straight to a state-level organization, a central authority pulling the strings. The temple wasn't just for worship. It was the economic and political hub, too.
And isn't this where writing pops up? In Iana?
Exactly. The earliest proto-cuneiform tablets are found there. And what are they about? Mostly admin, tracking grain, beer, livestock for the temple economy.
Keeping the bucks.
Pretty much. And the cylinder seals from that time often show this figure, the priest-king, merging that spiritual and worldly power visually. Later, of course, you get figures like Gilgamesh, proper kings, and the building of those massive city walls we mentioned. Power made physical.
The famous walls of Uruk. Okay, so Uruk, big temples, ziggurats, clear links between religion, power, early kingship, writing for admin. How does Mohenjo-Daro compare on the architecture front? Did they have giant temples too?
And this is where it gets really interesting. No, they didn't. Archaeologists haven't found anything that looks like a Mesopotamian ziggurat in Mohenjo-Daro, or clear palaces, or, rich royal tombs.
Really? So what did they build on a large scale?
The focus seems much more civic or communal. The most famous example is the Great Bath on the Citadel, a big, beautifully made, waterproof pool, likely for public ceremonies, maybe ritual bathing.
So public rituals rather than glorifying one ruler or god in a massive temple.
That seems to be the case. They also had the granary. We talked about storage, but maybe it was also an assembly hall. Its exact use is debated, but it was clearly a large public building. There are other candidates for assembly halls too, and something called the college hall.
More communal spaces again.
Right. The emphasis just feels different. Less about individual rulers, more about the community or collective activities. They had religious symbols, yes, horned figures, mother goddesses, but not those towering temples like Uruk.
What about the city layout, the citadel mound versus the lower city?
That definitely suggests some kind of functional separation. Maybe admin and religious stuff up on the citadel and everyday living and working down below.
And walls. Did Mohenjo-Daro have walls like Uruk?
Not a full city wall, interestingly. They had fortified gateways, but the whole city wasn't enclosed like Uruk. Maybe a different sense of security or different kind of governance. The big investment seems to be in the infrastructure within the city, building the platform mound, the bath, the granary, and especially that incredible drainage system.
Okay, so Uruk's skyline shouts, temple, power, state, while Mohenjo-Daro's big projects seem more about public order, ritual, maybe community welfare.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Both built big, but what they built tells a different story about their priorities. Uruk looked upwards, linking earth and sky, rulers and gods. Mohenjo-Daro seems more focused inwards on the orderly functioning of the city itself.
That difference is fascinating. Let's zoom in on that internal organization, urban planning, community life. Mohenjo-Daro's grid plan is legendary, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's remarkable. The city sits on these huge mud brick platforms, probably for flood protection, and then boom, this incredibly regular grid of streets, main streets running north, south, east, west, dividing everything into neat blocks.
Like a modern city plan, almost.
It really feels like it. And the buildings, mostly houses and workshops, line up along these streets. They use standardized big bricks, too. It all screams central planning, control, land allocation, building codes, real urban order.
How would that grid have affected daily life? Easier to get around?
Definitely easier navigation.
Yeah.
Probably easier for administration, too, moving officials or goods around. And then you have that drainage system we keep mentioning. Covered drains running along streets, connected to houses, even bathrooms inside houses.
Bathrooms connected to drains. That's seriously advanced.
It's the earliest known citywide sanitation system. Shows a real concern for public health, which you'd need with so many people packed together. Plus, they found over 700 wells. Planned access to water was clearly a priority.
So very practical, very organized. What about Uruk? Was it just a jumble?
Not a jumble, but definitely less rigid. It seems to have grown more organically, expanding out from those big temple areas, Yana and Anu. No strict grid.
But it wasn't chaotic.
No, it had structure. A network of canals ran right through the city, connecting to the Euphrates.
Yeah.
These were like highways for transport, goods, maybe people in boats. And probably helped with the drainage, too.
Yeah.
Someone called it Venice in the desert.
Canals instead of streets as the main arteries?
Possibly the main transport routes, yeah. And the residential areas often seem grouped by occupation. Like the potters might live in one area, weavers in another.
Ah, craft specialization zones?
Something like that. They also had courtyard houses, similar to Mohenjo-Daro, offering some privacy. And there were likely wide avenues for religious processions. And then surrounding it all, that massive city wall attributed to Gilgamesh, defining the city, keeping others out.
So two different approaches. Mohenjo-Daro, order, hygiene, the grid, public works. Uruk, more organic, centered on temples, logistics handled by canals, defined by the wall.
Exactly. The physical layout reflects those different priorities we talked about, civic order versus temple power and trade logistics. And that layout shapes how people live and interact every single day.
Right. Which brings us to the people themselves. Social structure, daily life. In Uruk, you mentioned the temples, the priest king. What about everyone else? Was it very hierarchical?
The evidence points increasingly towards, yes, a pretty stratified society in Uruk. You see in burials over time, some graves get much richer grave goods than others. The texts mention specialized workers getting those rations from the temple, implying a hierarchy of labor.
So different jobs, different statuses.
Looks like it. Early writings even hint at nobles, maybe inherited kingship later on. You could imagine these distinct groups: farmers, herders, craftsmen, traders, priests, bureaucrats, maybe soldiers.
And gender roles.
Seems to have become more patriarchal over time in Mesopotamia, men dominating leadership roles. The women certainly had economic roles, maybe especially in things like making textiles.
Okay, so Uruk. Developing a clear social pyramid, visible elite, status linked to job, maybe birth. How does Mohenjo-Daro compare? You hinted it might be flatter.
That's the big debate. The evidence there is just less obvious. You don't find those super rich tombs or obvious palaces. The houses vary a bit in size, but it's not like huge mansions next to tiny huts. It's more uniform.
So maybe less inequality. Or just less flashy.
Exactly. Some suggest maybe a more decentralized government, ruled by assemblies, maybe. There's no one built. Everyone agrees it's the palace.
Yeah.
The biggest houses are impressive, sure, but maybe more like large merchant houses than royal residences. And the grave goods are generally pretty modest.
So where was the power then, if not kings and palaces?
Theories abound. Maybe powerful merchant groups. Or a priestly class that just didn't show off its wealth in the same way. The famous little priest king statue hints at an elite individual, but we don't know his actual role.
But they still had different jobs, right? Specialists.
Oh, for sure. Farmers, bead makers, metal workers, traders. We find workshops for these crafts, but interestingly, they seem scattered around the city, not just clustered in elite areas.
And gender in the Indus? Any clearer?
Even harder to tell, honestly. We see figures of both men and women. Some suggest the prominence of female figurines might mean women had important ceremonial roles, perhaps linked to goddess worship. But it's speculative.
So Uruk's hierarchy seems pretty visible in the archaeology. Mohenjo-Daro's is much more ambiguous, maybe less steep, maybe just expressed differently.
That's the crux of it. Uruk fits a more familiar pattern of hierarchy. Mohenjo-Daro makes us question if there are other ways to organize a complex urban society.
Which leads perfectly into identity. How did living in these places change how people saw themselves, moving away from just family or tribe?
It must have been a huge mental shift. In a small village, everyone knows everyone. Identity is tied to kinship. In a city with thousands, that changes. People start identifying with the city itself, being from Uruk or from Mohenjo-Daro.
A new kind of belonging.
Exactly. Pride in city symbols, Inanna for Uruk, maybe that's shared Harappan culture itself. And new ways to belong emerge based on your job, your social class, your role in the city's rituals. You might be a scribe first and a member of X family second.
So more abstract affiliations, less personal.
In some ways, you have to interact with strangers constantly, so you need more impersonal rules, maybe early forms of law. Record keeping becomes important. You're known by your name on a list, not just by sight.
And religion played a role in that civic identity, too.
Definitely. Uruk's identity was tied up with its patron gods. Mohenjo-Daro's communal activities, like at the Great Bath, would have built a shared sense of community. And crucially, there's the us versus them, inside the city walls versus outside.
Those walls again, creating insiders and outsiders.
Physically and mentally. In Mesopotamia, you get this idea of the city as civilization and the outside as wild or barbaric. Think of the Epic of Gilgamesh, how Enkidu has to be civilized by coming to the city.
And in the Indus, how did they define us?
Maybe through their shared sense of order. The planning, the hygiene, the standardized weights and measures, that whole package might have been part of what it meant to be Harappan, distinct from other groups.
And cities become centers for learning, innovation.
Absolutely. Concentrating people concentrates knowledge. Uruk was key for writing, math. Mohenjo-Daro shows incredible skill in planning, engineering, craft production. That shared Indus culture across such a huge area suggests a powerful shared ideology, too.
So becoming urban meant a bigger scale of identity, new ways to belong, a different worldview, a clearer line between us and them, and maybe a more complex sense of self.
It's a profound change in human consciousness, really, driven by living together in these new, large-scale settlements.
But living packed together like that must have had downsides, too. What were the consequences, the challenges of this new urban life?
Oh, definitely. Big challenges. Sanitation's an obvious one. Lots of people, lots of waste disease risk goes way up.
Which makes Mohenjo-Daro's drains even more impressive.
Exactly. It shows they were aware of the problem and trying to tackle it. But even the best system needs maintenance. Uruk's system seems less advanced, relying more on canals and maybe open drains or pits. So public health was likely a constant struggle. Urban death rates might have been higher than in the countryside.
Cities might have needed constant migration from outside just to keep their numbers up.
Quite possibly. They were dynamic, but potentially unhealthy places.
What about social problems? Inequality.
Yeah, that stratification in Uruk probably caused tension. Elites accumulating wealth while others worked for rations. That can breed resentment. We see hints of conflict later in Mesopotamian history.
And the Indus, if it was more equal.
Maybe less tension from stark wealth gaps, but controlling resources, managing trade that could still create stress. And inequality might have grown over time there too, especially towards the end. Plus, you have potential gender inequality, more obviously in Mesopotamia, but maybe present in different ways in the Indus too.
So cities created new social pressures. And what about just survival? Were they fragile?
Surprisingly so, in some ways. They depended heavily on their environment. Mesopotamia faced soil salinization from all that irrigation. Rivers could change course, cutting off water or trade. Climate shifts, like major droughts, could be disastrous.
The Indus faced environmental issues too, right? Drying climate.
Big time. The river systems changed significantly. The climate seems to have gotten drier. That would have hit their agriculture hard. Trade networks could collapse too if Uruk's expansion faltered or the Indus-Mesopotamia trade dried up. That's a huge economic shock.
And conflict.
Warfare, always a risk, especially in Mesopotamia with competing city-states, maybe internal unrest too. Ultimately, if the governing systems, whatever they were, couldn't cope with these combined pressures, environmental, economic, social things could fall apart. We see evidence of deurbanization, people leaving the cities, especially in the Indus region later on.
So amazing achievements, but also new vulnerabilities. Health inequality, dependence on complex systems, environmental stability.
Exactly. The city was a powerful invention, but also a risky one in some ways.
We've covered so much ground. Maybe we can just quickly run through the key comparisons again. Uruk versus Mohenjo-Daro side by side.
Sure. So, timeline. Uruk starts earlier, lasts longer as a major center. Location. Both river valleys, but different challenges. Irrigation versus flood management. Size. Uruk possibly denser population peak.
Urban plan. Uruk more organic. Mohenjo-Daro, that famous grid. Architecture. Uruk's temples and walls versus Mohenjo-Daro's civic stuff, like the Great Bath.
Politics. Uruk moving towards kingship, temple power. Mohenjo-Daro, still debated, maybe more corporate or collective. Economy. Both based on surplus ag and trade, but Indus shows more standardization.
Social structure. Uruk looks more hierarchical, Mohenjo-Daro less obviously so. Writing. Uruk invents cuneiform for admin. Indus script is undeciphered, used differently, it seems.
Religion. Uruk's big temples versus Indus iconography and maybe public rituals. And legacy. Uruk's influence on later Mesopotamia is clear. Mohenjo-Daro's legacy is more debated after its decline.
That really crystallizes the differences and the similarities, too. They face similar challenges of just being a city, but found unique solutions. So stepping back, what's the big takeaway from this whole urban revolution?
It's just a fundamental turning point. It changed what it meant to be human almost, living collectively on that scale, specializing, relying on strangers, forming identities beyond just your family.
And those walls we keep mentioning, literal and symbolic, were key to that change, weren't they?
Absolutely central. The physical walls, security, yes, but also defining us and them, creating that urban identity, imposing discipline. And the symbolic walls, social class, gender roles, the idea of civilized versus wild. They structured society, created hierarchies.
So the walls of the first cities didn't just contain people, they reshaped human destiny, created progress, but also new problems we still grapple with. The city became our home, in a way.
Couldn't have said it better. Uruk and Mohenjo-Daro give us this incredible window into how it all began, the universal challenges, the unique cultural answers.
And for you listening, as you walk around your own town or city today, maybe think about those echoes. How does the layout, the social mix, the feeling of belonging connect back to these ancient experiments?
Yeah, and maybe think about our modern walls. Economic divides, online filter bubbles, national borders.
Yeah.
How do they shape our urban experience, our identities, just like those ancient walls did?
That's definitely something to chew on. If this has sparked your interest, there's so much more to explore. The archaeology itself is fascinating. But maybe start with that question. What's the biggest wall-shaping city life for you today? Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.